Greetings and salutations, my fellow YouTubers. I'm Veston, and this is Cartoon Theory. I think I talked enough about Kids Next Door for a while. Let's choose something different. Now, the question is, why did Phil Vischer stop directing VeggieTales? If you're wondering, no, this is not just about after the in-house company of Big Idea went bankrupt. I'm talking about the show as a whole. Before I go into my theory as to why, allow me to explain his directing filmography. For Phil Vischer, since he was the one who brought VeggieTales to life alongside Mike Naraki, it seems appropriate that he would be the show's primary director. During the first 6 years of VeggieTales, 1993 and 1999, he directed nearly every episode. Silly Songs don't count because those were directed by co-creator Mike Naraki or animation director Chris Olsen. As a writer and director, it's always up to Phil to be sure to get whatever he needs in the script done and act it out right. And while he did direct the stories, he didn't direct any of the short stuff like the Water Buffalo song or the Forgive-O-Matic. Those were directed by former VeggieTales animator Chris Olsen. This let Phil be creative with writing the comedy for those two shorts. Chris eventually joined Mike Naraki in directing the second Silly Song, the Hairbrush song. Now here's where it gets interesting. By 1997, after finishing the Toys Say Christmas, despite all the issues they had gone through at the studio with only 10 people on staff, a sing-along video was underway. And by that point, Phil was starting to get a little leery about directing all the episodes. So at one point during pre-production, Phil had no choice but to turn to his friend and co-creator Mike Naraki and say, "Mike, why don't you try one of these?" So that's what Mike did. Mike wrote and directed all the wraparound segments for the sing-along video. That way, Phil could get his directing and writing job underway for the upcoming Larry Boy episode that came up an episode after. It happened again when Man Blueberry came around. After doing Just a Big Wall, Phil let Mike direct Man Blueberry because, well, it was Mike Naraki's idea to do an homage to Man Bovary, which I myself have not read. But that doesn't mean that Phil didn't contribute to the show itself. He actually wrote two things for the episode. The first countertop sequence was with Larry driving a Jeep, and he also wrote the show's theme, the Thankfulness song. And I'm glad he wrote it, because I'm not sure how Mike would have written it. Phil would be absent from writing and directing something for VeggieTales until late in 1998, when he wrote and directed the VeggieTales Christmas Spectacular, which was not long after Silly Songs was uncanceled by Archibald Asparagus. His last regular episode Phil ever directed was Larry Boy and the Rumor Weed, and shortly after that he stepped down from the director's chair and just went back to voice acting and writing. His actual last VeggieTales-related project he directed was Jonah, which he co-created and wrote with Mike Naraki. Now, here's my theory as to why he stopped directing the show, even after the in-house company went bankrupt. I think somewhere around the line in the late 1990s, Phil Vischer must have realized that being a director wasn't as easy as he thought it would be. He was more world-renowned for writing scripts and voicing in them. So by the time King George and Ducky rolled around, he gave his directing duties to either Mike Naraki, Tim Hodge, Brian Roberts, or pretty much anybody who was involved with the studio at the time. So yeah, I think the reason he stopped is because directing can be hard work sometimes. It makes sense since the in-house studio for Big Idea went bankrupt. Phil went from the guy who created the show and had a big involvement in it to the guy who funded it and put in no creative input whatsoever. Throughout VeggieTales' later years, Phil was an uncredited executive producer. I did enjoy one of his shows he wrote after the bankruptcy, which was The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. On a related note, ever since NBC Universal bought the rights to VeggieTales with VeggieTales in the House, I know that the franchise would someday be in danger. But thankfully, in 2019, there was a ray of hope with the VeggieTales show where Phil Vischer was brought on board alongside his friends and colleagues and served as the head showrunner. Unfortunately, by 2021, NBC Universal decided to give Phil and his friends the axe, and of course, the franchise VeggieTales stopped in its tracks very prematurely. Sometimes life is just too hard to understand. But, and on a happy note, VeggieTales will always hold a huge place in my heart, and even God's heart. So that's all for now. Let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on Phil and VeggieTales itself. Sayonara, and see you next time.